Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you to the last session of the 7th New England Rally, and I see signs that it's going to be one of our most successful ones. And I'm ought to tell you that in spite of the reports in the newspaper, this is the largest rally we have had to date, and we are going to have quite a few more at dinner tonight than we had last year or the year before. And while we won't be content about the progress of the rally until they have to rebuild the hotel to have more rooms for us, we are pleased and encouraged and grateful to all of you for helping us reach this point. When the rally first was proposed some 8 years ago, we were told that it was a nice idea, but it couldn't possibly succeed. So we are especially pleased that each year we have grown some, and this year rather more than most. And we, of course, are already laying plans for next year. We hope you are. And I don't know. It's always a problem as to whether we can do a better job as far as speakers are concerned each year. But fortunately, we have some people who are semi-perennial, at least, and who always seem to improve in and of themselves as the years go by, so that we don't hesitate at all about asking them to come back. And I want just to say that word of thanks to you people and say that we will try to get this afternoon's program off on schedule, because the hotel has quite a problem to get this set up for the dinner in the brief 2 hours that we allow them. And so we will keep things moving, I hope. For our first host this afternoon, we have a very charming gentleman who's been with us before. He's well known to all of you, I'm sure, because he's one of the courageous people in the publishing world who has been willing to put out conservative books, and he's put out a tremendous number of them, many of which have been extremely helpful. And we want to do everything we can to encourage him to keep up this process. And in addition to all the good works he does, he's a very charming friend and a delightful conversationalist, and it is a little too bad that we have to restrict him as we do all our hosts and moderators, but I know that Devin is going to do a very delightful job for us, and I give you Devin A. Garrity, the head of Devin Adair Publishers.
Thank you for the very nice introduction, Larry. I've had the honor since this rally started of being able to introduce a distinguished person each year, sometimes more difficult than others. I never could quite fathom some of the preachers I've had to introduce, and I've always felt slightly hypocritical, perhaps. But there's one man that I've never had anything but joy in being with, introducing, the man I'm going to introduce today. A year ago, I had a person to introduce, and I found myself up in Mr. Robert Montgomery's room arguing the pros and cons of certain political positions. And I suddenly realized that my time had gone for introducing and that I was half an hour late, and I tore down, and it was too late. Colonel Bunker had done the job, and I figured I'd never be asked back again, but he forgave, and he said, all right. Problem that concerns me today and must concern a number of you is just what a conservative is and what kind of a conservative are you. I lost my suitcase in Grand Central Station coming up here. The locker room was robbed, and a lot of clothing and a lot of things that I will never be able to replace. And I reported it to the authorities, and they were very indifferent about it. They assured me that it happened every night. Not only that, not only in Grand Central, but in Pennsylvania Station, and it was rising now, so that I would advise you before you put your suitcases in a locker in New York, in either Grand Central Station or Pennsylvania Station, to think twice. That made me a certain type of conservative. Basically speaking, why I'm a conservative has to do with, I have said this before, my study of nature. I'm very interested in nature. I've been a student of it, and ecology is my subject, and I just love what we are doing to ourselves and our environment and wonder whether we can survive. And when I look at nature, I observe one of the truest things about nature, and that is that everything in it is different. There are no two trees alike, no two plants alike, no two anything alike. Everything is totally different in nature. Originally, when this country was set up, it was set up by people who prided themselves on being individualists, being different, being in conformity with nature to that degree. Presently, the liberal thrust is to say that all people are alike, that only environments differ. If we give everyone the same environment, they will come out like peas in a pod, and they will all be the same. That basically is why I'm a conservative. The original American idea was conservative in conformity with nature. And today, what we're fighting today is the liberal definition of egalitarianism, which is quickly totalitarianism. At any rate, that's my position. Tom Anderson's position, well, let's say, first of all, when anybody says to me, usually in a hostile manner, what do you consider yourself? Are you a reactionary? Are you a right-wing extremist? Are you a Republican? Are you a what? I say I'm me. It's very easy usually to define liberals. You can point out what they're going to say with any given stimulus. You know exactly how they're going to stand on certain things like South Africa, Rhodesia, Spain, you just mentioned it, and you go on from there into sex education and the rest we've heard about. When you find an individualist, such as the man I'm going to introduce, you wonder what makes him tick. It's a perfectly natural thing to do. And I had breakfast with him this morning, and I asked him a little bit about himself. And he told me that his father had been a track coach at Vanderbilt University for 43 years. His mother had been an artist. He was one of 5 children. He went through Vanderbilt University, not studying too hard, but being interested in 2 things that you could imagine him being interested in. One was athletics, and the other was campus politics. But he did run into a Professor Dyer, who was a simple professor, not the complicated type of overeducated or overdegreed PhDs that we have today, not interested in pupils or in teaching students. He had a man who inspired him. And this professor, during the Depression, took the New Deal apart piece by piece, and at that point, Tom's future was set. He had become, he didn't know it at the time, an idealistic conservative, which is what he is today. Beyond that, he's a man who has a great sense of humor, and it's based on the understatement, which makes him rather unusual. His column, which I read all the time in the Arkansas Farmer, is full of humor. Tom, have you heard the variation on that old chestnut? Who was that lady I seen you with last night? That was no lady, that was my son. At any rate, to strike a serious note and to wind this thing up, Tom is qualified to be in politics. Through his background, his training, his accomplishments in business, his ability as a speaker, I would love to see, and I hope you will urge him to see, that he tries for the Senate seat of Gore in Tennessee. Tom, take it away. I mean that.
Seems like everything at this meeting is extreme, including the introductions. And that one reminds me of the poor little country boy who moved from Georgia to the big city and got fabulously rich. And he went high society in a big way. One night he was having a formal dinner for 16 guests when his little brother, who he hadn't seen in 23 years, came in the house. The worst hick you ever saw. Nothing to do but invite little brother to dinner. They served the soup. Little brother took a big swallow of soup, and it was unbearably hot. He spit it out across the table. The stunned guests looked around at each other, and little brother smiled and said, "Some damn fools would have swallowed that." Several weeks ago, I spoke to the student body of an exclusive private girls' school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I decided that I would close the generation gap and identify with relevancy and empathy. So I got right with it from the start and did my thing with my best stories and jokes. I underwhelmed them. I didn't get a single laugh, not one single bit of applause. I did get one laugh at the end of my talk when I said the only hope for this country and the world is to return to Christianity. They broke out laughing. We had a question and answer. The first little girl got up and said, "Mr. Anderson, I disagree with every single word you said." Great applause. Every question was antagonistic. Every antagonistic question was applauded. I turned to the headmistress and said, "Well, you've done a wonderful job in brainwashing these children." She said, "Mr. Anderson, I would have you know that we feel our professors are very evenly divided on these questions." And I said, "Yes, probably so. 50% for Red China and 50% for Russia." She had a hard time getting them to leave. They gathered around down front, and a group of them said, "Mr. Anderson, we are Marxists." Finally, she shooed them out to their waiting Cadillacs. 12, 15-year-old children. It'll be 2 or 3 years before they are ready to try to overthrow the country, I guess. The New Left has reportedly captured the student body presidencies in more than half of our institutions of higher learning. Fortune magazine has reported that 700,000 young Americans in colleges and universities now accept the communist condemnation of American capitalism and want to destroy the system. Several years ago, I wrote, "It's not all over until we quit." But unless we can convince the young people, we can't win in our time. Young people, your opportunities are unlimited, except by government. There is less competition today than ever before if you really want to work. Most of your competitors don't. This is the age of the half-done job. More and more pay for less and less work. Beatniks are beaten because they refuse to try. Beatniks are long on hair and short on character. When you cash in your chips for this life, any of us, young or old, the only thing of value we have which we can take with us is our character. Character is a victory, not a gift. Character knows no race, no creed, no color, no circumstance. If you lack it, it's nobody's fault but your own. American youth, we are told, has no heroes today in the field of business. In the Harvard class of 1968, only 6% of the students said that they would enter business. Most of the so-called students prefer education, research, and government service, but not the profit motive. They prefer to live on the taxpayers. January's Fortune magazine said that these students believe, quote, business is immoral. Immoral in its behavior and immoral in its refusal to question itself, close quote. Young people are appalled, they say, at the lengths executives will go to make a profit. A leading brokerage house, it is reported, shortchanges its small customers and favors the large ones. This has had a big play across the country in the past few weeks. I was in the brokerage business for 8 years. In these 8 years, I never knew a person who ever reneged on a deal. All made verbally, most of them over the telephone. I submit that American business is more honest than college athletics, and more honest than most teachers, and infinitely more honest than most politicians. Athletes have always had the advantage in the classroom. They did in the 30s and they do now. You don't have amateur football and basketball at most universities today. They are professional. Of course, we adults, known as fans, are more responsible for the hypocrisy of so-called amateur athletics than are the students. The wife of a losing football coach wrote a friend, each Saturday as I walk to the stadium, I feel as if my stomach were filled with sharp stones. I'm sure that everyone in my vicinity can hear my heartbeat. As we stand to sing the Star-Spangled Banner, I ask God not to let them boo my husband or the team. I ask them to let the fans understand that these are boys playing, that they don't want to make mistakes. They don't want to fumble. I've asked this same God to help me explain to my daughter a television panel show that rips her father apart. I've asked him to teach us how to keep our own sons from being small and petty and vicious. There are so many evidences that show how hard the boys have worked on the practice and playing field. I can't believe that everything has to be measured by the scoreboard. But a big-time college football coach has declared, quote, winning is not the most important thing, it's the only thing. A certain winning basketball coach derisively refers to losing coaches as character builders. And many coaches will cheat and then teach the youth they are molding to cheat in any way possible to win. In big-time college football, cheating and recruiting and in classrooms, in remuneration and on the playing field is customary. Win at all costs, the alumni demand. Coaches caught in rule violations are never fired if they win. Many of the self-styled molders of youthful character have no character. The contract of a football coach with a college is a one-way street. If he gets a better offer, he walks out. If he gets fired, the college has to buy up his contract. The trouble with America today is erosion, not of the soil, but of our morality. Freedom and morality are indivisible. The agnostic pragmatists who call themselves liberals have taught our young people, one, that there is no clear distinction between right and wrong, two, that there are no eternal verities, no absolute truths, three, that environment determines truth, and since environment constantly changes, everything is relative, four, that life adjustment, not inculcation of principles and disciplines, is the aim of education, five, that patriotism is absurd and out of date, And 6, that the government owes you a drink of some magic elixir called equality and a decent standard of living. The Freudian frauds further proclaim that none of us, young or old, is responsible for what we become, that man is the product of his hereditary environment, and you cannot expect him to rise above it. And many of those we are seeing today won't, I'm afraid. Our young militants, apparently brought up to the permissive non-reality of Dr. Spock, insist on running away from reality. They bemoan the world they never made, and what they fail to understand is that we must live in the world as it is and as it can be. Why destroy the American system, which has produced the highest standard of living ever known in human history, just because it is not perfect? Our republic, with its capitalist economy, is indeed imperfect, but it is the least reprehensible form of government and economics which exists. There will never be perfect people this side of heaven. No society is better than the individuals in it. No nation advances except as the citizens who comprise it grow as individuals. The collectivists called liberals seem to have convinced most of our young people that a socialist government can legislate unsuccessful people into prosperity by legislating successful people out of it. If that is true, why should a man work to succeed? The fact is that there is no such thing as equality. We cannot be free and equal. Equal men are not free, and free men are not equal. There's not even equality in heaven. God has his select, his chosen. There's not even equality under the law. 3-time losers are penalized. The hippies want to replace dog-eat-dog with dog-love-dog. Both are animalism and can only return civilization to the jungle. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "A man is what he thinks about all day long." On that basis, to draw even a picture of a hippie brain would be obscene. A psychiatrist friend of mine, I take that back, I don't have any psychiatrist friends, but he told me that he sent a $325 bill to a hippie patient the other day, $25 for listening and $300 to clean up the couch. Some young people amongst us today complain because they say there is no more opportunity. Somebody has estimated that 80% of the world's knowledge has been developed in the past 10 years and is doubling every 10 years. 90% of all the drugs being prescribed by physicians today were not even known 10 years ago. 10 years from now, 3/4 of all the people who will work in industry will be producing products that have not been invented yet. We had a young and inexperienced, at work that is, job applicant who asked for an outrageously high salary, and she said the work is much harder when you don't know anything about it. If they can't start at the top, they want more for starting at the bottom. One of the main reasons America rose to become the greatest nation in the history of the world was because we believed in inequality, in the inequality of man, in the right of any man, no matter to what station born, to rise from the bottom to the top, or the right to be a bum, the right of anybody to be somebody. An old Hindu proverb says, "There is nothing noble in being superior to some other man. The true nobility is in being superior to your previous self." The fact is that all mature nations are inherently unequal. That's why materialist America, with only 6% of the world's people and 7% of the world's land, produces more than half of the world's goods. The sinister, selfish, and square system of American free enterprise, the profit and loss system, has enabled Americans to own 71% of the world's automobiles, 56% of the world's telephones, 83% of the world's TV sets, and, forgive me hippies, 90% of the world's bathtubs. The inventiveness of the American system has long been the envy of the world, and the only new thing the hippie set has produced is a new drug mixing LSD in the pill so they can take a trip without the kids. These young people think they invented sex. Scientists say that kissing started because of a craving for salt. A caveman discovered he could cool off on a hot day by licking his neighbor's cheek. Then he found it was more fun if the neighbor was female, and then he forgot all about salt. Ours has been the greatest nation in history because of three things, I think, primarily. The American system of free enterprise, the land and the climate, and the kind of religious, creative, hard-working people who settled and made this country. American business helped do this job, not the government. Business did it in spite of government, which has been anti-business for the past 30 years. Foreigners didn't do it, and youth didn't do it. We squares over 30 and our parents and grandparents did it and gave a good part of it to most of the world and to our youth, neither of which appreciated it. But for those students of history and human nature, that's not too surprising either. Only one of the 7 people Jesus cured of leprosy even had the decency to thank him. Meanwhile, the voice from the campus cries hypocrisy at the community leaders and the so-called establishment. Students decry the rat race, the crushing materialism, our money-mad society, and then wire home collect for $200 to finance a spring bash of booze and sex at Fort Lauderdale or a trip to New York for a parade to honor the Viet Cong. They are as spoiled as a butcher's dog, and they are always itching for money but never scratching for it. I heard about a widow who raised 5 wonderful boys and did it all by herself, and she was asked, how in the world did you do it? She said the main thing is a pat on the back. You must do it early enough, often enough, and low enough. If these so-called campus idealists are opposed to materialism, if their hearts bleed for the disadvantaged, the guilt-ridden phonies should know that just to help defeat hypocrisy, they may turn over their new car, their TV sets, their stereo, tape recorder, electric blanket, hair dryer, camera, and fancy mod wardrobes to me, and I will see that they go to the proper charities. Why don't these self-described idealists practice what they preach? They don't do it because of the same reason none of the liberals do it. I've never known an honest liberal. I'm sure there are some. I've never known one of these so-called humanitarians who ever gave of his own self and substance till it hurt. I mean so-called liberal humanitarians. They always want to give away our money. like the Kennedys with their $400 million, live out of foundations. Why don't these so-called idealists attack communism, which is a scourge of the world? Yet most Americans, young and old, either ignore it or embrace it. It is the cause of most of the world's problems today. But we are almost never told the truth about it, not by our professors, by our movies, television, magazines, or newspapers. Why not? Well, one reason is our fault. We have defaulted the communication system. We can and should own a good part of the communication system if we went about it the right way. I don't blame young people for being upset by the establishment. They've been had by the establishment. But the establishment is not capitalism and what is known as Americanism. It is a combination of industrial cartelists, education and foundation bureaucrats, leftist churchmen, and lightweight communicators who are deliberately trying to convert this nation into a Marxist, fascist welfare state for their own aggrandizement and convenience. Most of these people are neither Marxists nor fascists, but they are manipulated by communists, and they are pawns in the communist game. One evening, a month or so ago, I spoke to a small crowd at Vanderbilt University. During the question and answer period, one sweet young thing with his hair on his shoulders stood up and said, "We are not Marxists. We are not communists. We don't want total government. We want no government, no rules. We believe in atheism, free love, and homosexuality between consenting adults." Now, how does a square like me have dialogue with that? I merely asked the shaven audience, why would you sit there inert and let such slobs as that destroy your university, your country, and your freedom? Why don't you throw him out? No answer. The hippie god is happiness. Is free love the key to happiness? Ernest Hemingway bragged, "I've bedded every woman I ever really wanted, and some I didn't," and he died a suicide. People keep telling me that the campus anarchists and the pacifists and the Marxists and the pot addicts and the fairies are a very small minority. Very well, maybe they are. But tell me why an overwhelming majority of decent young people will sit by supinely while its universities are being hijacked and burned. I can't conceive of doing that when I was in school. Can't conceive of it. I can't conceive of it happening. There would have been bloodshed on the campus, and plenty of it, student bloodshed by students. More appalling than the outrages perpetrated by the collegiate punks, pinks, and perverts is the spineless acquiescence of the student majority. Furthermore, many surveys have shown that the majority agree with the ideas and the goals of the anarchists, but they just disagree on their methods. We are constantly told that only 2% of the students are disrupting the campuses, but that's not true. The cowardly, apathetic, and silent 98% who are uncommitted are guilty of letting it happen. And the same goes for adult America. Most college students, according to a recent national survey, believe that the chief benefit of a college education is to increase one's earning power. Are these the same idealists who are bemoaning the cold commercial world they never made? Often they are. The point is that while money is not the main reason to go to college, neither is making over the world to suit the Marxist fairy tale. Thousands of small businessmen, such as me, couldn't care less whether our people got a college degree. The main reason to seek a higher education is to lift your horizon, to enable you to appreciate the finer things of life, to help you make a good life and not a good living. When you graduate from college, you are not educated, but you should have learned what it means to be educated. You should have the desire and the know-how to get an education. The first thing an educated person learns to do is to walk alone. When things are morally and legally wrong, it is right to rebel, whether we are young or old. But our rebellion must be moral, legal, and constructive, else we are wrong. Students don't have a moral or legal right to take over a building. They are violating property rights and the rights of other students, and they should be routed out with tear gas, arrested, expelled, and given jail sentences. Some of these anarchists, criminals, and traitors have the gall to compare themselves with Patrick Henry and Nathan Hale. In a constitutional republic, it is inexcusable to resort to violence to redress so-called ills or to overthrow the establishment. There is a peaceful, legal way. Our founding fathers had none. They had no voice, no representation. At the recent meeting of the American newspaper editors in Washington, the head of Webster College in Missouri proposed a guaranteed income for everybody at age 18, so they would have, quote, economic maturity, close quote. And a recent editor of the Harvard student newspaper editorialized for freedom from having to work for a living. A far better idea would be to restrict the vote to people of 25 or over who pay income tax. If and when we ever kill the personal income tax, ownership of property should become a voting requirement. And we should have a guaranteed annual hunger program for all able-bodied adults who refuse to take any decent available job. Along with a guaranteed annual jail program for all of them who refuse to support their dependent children or the dependent children of the woman they are currently living with. Many young people think it is hypocrisy to be forced to go 6,000 miles to fight communism in Vietnam and to be jailed for even trying to fight it 90 miles away in Cuba. Hypocrisy is not the right word. Criminal is more appropriate. It is unconstitutional to draft any American to fight in any undeclared war, and it is criminal to force him to offer his life in any war we don't intend to win and in which we are deliberately helping the enemy. So why don't these idealists help us oppose the establishment legally and morally instead of helping the enemy destroy the establishment, which is treason? The hypocritical Nuremberg trials, which we promoted and which only a handful of statesmen, such as Senator Taft, had the integrity to brand as a fraud, decreed that men should not contradict their principles even when ordered to do so. This is not what Christ admonished, but what would most of our recent leaders care or know about that? They may be insiders, but not inside Christianity. On the basis of the Nuremberg trials, many of us should have refused to go to World War II. Along with Lindbergh and many others, many of whom were destroyed as public favorites for telling the truth, I thought then and think now that World War II was the wrong war at the wrong time against the wrong enemy. That we couldn't possibly win because we were fighting with enemy number one against enemy number two. I went to the war only because, not being a pacifist, the only acceptable and moral alternative would have been to renounce my citizenship and leave the country. And that brings me to a point I wish to discuss, to a question to which I have no satisfactory answer. At what point does a moral patriot defy so-called legal authority? Millions of us have for many years obeyed hundreds, if not thousands, of bad laws, some of which were even clearly unconstitutional. Jesus obeyed all the Roman laws and commanded his disciples to render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. I was shocked the other day when a friend who proclaims to be an honest Christian patriot confided to me that he had been cheating on his income tax for years. He rationalizes that Caesar is stealing from him, so it is all right for him to withhold from Caesar. If present trends continue, hundreds of thousands of good Americans may be confronted with a choice of acquiescing in the so-called legal confiscation of all lands and assets in excess of what Caesar decrees is plenty. Worse, we could be forced to send our children only to government schools. We are still enjoying many freedoms many other peoples don't have. At what point would we go to jail instead? Or go for our guns? A while back I said the time to buy a gun is when it becomes unlawful to own one. The best way to stop a bad man with a gun is with a good man with a gun. But however, I'm not sure I really meant that. William of Orange said that when his country was at stake, he would die in the last ditch. So would I, for a country which deserved to live. But suppose we become a Sodom and a Gomorrah. We are asking our draftees to die for their country if necessary. If they know the score, they know they'd be dying for nothing. Why shouldn't they be bitter? Is our country still worth dying for? Then it is worth living for. And we may not have much time. Maybe we can get that point over to the moderates who think we are kooks and crackpots. Ask them, at what point are you going to get involved? Cheating on income taxes is no more to be tolerated than is a phony Christian leader who tells his followers to disobey bad laws. Whether or not the income tax is right or wrong, or too high or too discriminatory, is beside the point. Whether the government is stealing from us to help the enemy or not is irrelevant. What is relevant is that the 16th Amendment is the law of the land. Obey it or get out. And I don't mean that one cannot morally test the law openly and legally. No one can be a good Christian without being an extremist. Christians have always been extremists, and never more so than today. Today, according to the American neo-dictatorship we live under, a Christian who refuses to hire a non-Christian is subject to heavy fine and imprisonment under the so-called Civil Rights Act. The great issue of our time is not poverty versus plenty. We are the richest nation in the history of the world and the most crime-ridden. Hunger is not the primary cause of either wars or civil strife. Germany started 2 wars on a full belly. Cuba was enjoying her all-time prosperity when she went communist. Most young anarchists, hippies, yippies, and communists in America are from middle-class homes or better. The great issue of our time is not education versus ignorance. Some of the most educated people are most wicked. You have to be educated even to know how to produce some crimes, commit some crimes. It has been acknowledged that 1/4 of Adolf Hitler's concentration camp guards held doctorate degrees. The great issue of our time is erosion of the morality. Communism was conceived not by the poor, but by rich intellectuals, and has been administered ever since from the top down. One of the favorite liberal terms, higher criticism, really means agnosticism. Almost all so-called liberals are either agnostics or atheists. At one modernist church, the presiding elder told the preacher, "You'll have to speak out good and loud, sir. The agnostics in here are something awful." J. Edgar Hoover has warned, quote, "The increasing number of sex crimes is due precisely to sex literature. Filthy literature is creating criminals faster than jails can be built," close quote. Where there is erosion of the national morality, property rights are always destroyed, and vice versa. Property rights are the foundation of morality. That's the reason one of the 10 Commandments decrees, "Thou shalt not steal." The politician who will steal for you will also steal from you, and some of our politicians would steal a dead fly from a blind spider. The so-called new morality is not new. It's as old as Sodom and Gomorrah. God is dead is not new. The new religion is atheism, anti-God. The new economics is feudalism and fascism. The new art is anti-art. The new politics is a return to the jungle. If you've got a minister who preaches a new moral code, what you need is not new values, but a new preacher. Heard about a modernist church that put a sign on its bulletin board saying, "There ain't no hell," and a church, fundamentalist church across the corner put on its board, "The hell there ain't." And I heard about one of these new young modernist preachers went down to a little country town in Alabama, and the second Sunday he announced that henceforth the congregation would please cease and desist from these passé outcries of praise the Lord and hallelujah. Very next Sunday, a little old lady got carried away and started saying, "Amen, praise the Lord." 2 ushers marched down the aisle, lifted her gently but firmly, and carried her down the center aisle. She took out a handkerchief and waved it to the congregation, said, "Jesus rode one into Jerusalem, and it takes and it takes 2 to carry me out." That's it. When you analyze all of our problems, no matter what they are, national or international, you get down to the basics, they all end up in morality. That's the problem. And we've got to be consistent with that morality. You can't be for morality and cheat on your income tax. Inflation is a matter of morality. Our debt is a matter of morality. Everything that's a matter of this country that's of serious import to us is a matter of morality. Stopping inflation by raising taxes reminds me of the sweet young thing who was taking a public service examination, and she had this problem put to her. If a man buys an article for $20.45 and sells it for $18.95, does he gain or lose? And she pondered for a moment and then answered brightly, he gains on the cents, but he loses on the dollars. You know, sometimes I think some of us kooks forget that if there were no such thing as a communist, we are still in pretty horrible shape. Our total commitment, including veterans' benefits, Social Security, and everything that we have bought, unpaid for, on the line, committed for, is $1.4 trillion. Just thinking about that will make you turn as pale as an undertaker's apprentice. Karl Marx said, spend them to death, and they are. Mr. Nixon has made no real effort to cut spending because every one of those dollars votes. So he puts on a surtax. What is this spending for, primarily? It is to promote, here and abroad, socialism, fascism, and communism. Or, let's say a good part of it is to promote treason and subversion against our Constitution and country. Since fiscal 1953, the beginning of the post-Korean period, so-called defense expenditures are up 41%, but domestic spending is up 242%. Since 1948, tax collections have increased to $109 billion a year, or 241%. Why? Was that population increases? No. During the past 20 years, the population of the United States rose 37%, and the cost of the federal government alone grew 10 times faster. Government expenses are not cut simply because all the expenses can vote. Defense spending has increased 68% since 1960. But non-defense spending has increased 97%. Even if there is no increased expenditure in Asia, and I think there will be a decrease, the federal government will spend in the coming fiscal year something like $185 to $90 billion, and that's more in 1 year than 32 presidents from George Washington through half the third term of Franklin D. Roosevelt spent in 153 years. And even when we surrender in Vietnam, there is no program formulated or intended to save that money. You know, you can save $1 billion here and there, and it mounts up. And some people think the super rich are paying the bill. The super rich are paying nothing. The super rich are getting a free ride. The top fringe and the bottom fringe, and we in the middle are paying almost the entire bill. The 16% of our people who make between $10,000 and $15,000 a year are already paying more than half of the federal income tax paid in this country. A centralized welfare state can only bring slavery, not freedom. Property rights are the foundation of human rights. The right to self-determination of associates is the very essence of human dignity. Forced equality is not democracy, but dictatorship. Now, we, of course, got rid of Johnson and got Nixon, which is like getting a divorce and getting custody of your wife's parents. But let's give Nixon a chance for another week or so. At least President Nixon has told the Viet Cong forcefully, we are not going to concede defeat, and that's semifinal. Most of us don't yet know really what to expect of President Nixon, which reminds me of the story of the three bears. Papa Bear, Mama Bear, and Baby Bear. Someone has eaten my porridge, boomed Papa Bear in his deep, deep voice. Someone has eaten my porridge, cried Baby Bear in his squeaky little voice. Bitch, 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 said Mama Bear. I haven't even put it in a bowl yet. Nixon Bear hasn't put our porridge in a bowl yet. But everything indicates that it will be the same old mix. Lukewarm mush, served differently and under a different name. Of course, we conservatives do want perfection, like the old maid who had waited so long for a right man to come along, and a little nephew said, ain't he waited so long for a ship to come in that her pier collapsed? Son? Some people even expected too much of Abe Fortas. After all, he was appointed by Johnson. And Fortas may be out, but he's not down. He has friends he hadn't even used yet. And isn't it nice to have a lady in the White House again? It's reported that Pat Nixon has completed her redecoration of the White House. She's moved the barbecue pits back outside, the bathrooms inside, and swimming trunks poolside. It's quite a job to do there. You may remember that the last president got rid of that Louis XIV bed in his bedroom because it was too small and got a Louis XV. But let's look on the light side, like the Pavlovian mouse who was asked by his buddy, and how are you getting along with Professor Pusey? Great, he answered. I've got him trained. Every time I ring the bell, he brings me the food. Even though we are the richest society in human history, and therefore necessarily one of the softest, wickedest, and unhappiest, we have no monopoly on permissiveness. Both ancient Greece and ancient Rome became permissive societies and went under. Permissiveness is now pervading not just the United States of America, but the entire West, where there is freedom. There is no permissiveness in Russia. There is still the firing squad in Siberia. Neither Christianity nor communism can mellow. If either mellows, it ceases to be. Neither the nature nor the goals of either has changed or can change. Some say that Our country has failed because its institutions have failed, because of the Supreme Court, the President, the church, the educational system, Congress, and business have failed. Actually, if we have failed, it'll be because the people have failed. The churches haven't failed. Christianity hasn't failed. We, the people, just don't have enough of it. A great actor was once asked to entertain at a large dinner party one evening. A ripple of excitement ran through the crowd of prominent guests as he rose to speak. He chose to recite the 23rd Psalm, which he did eloquently. He finished the dramatic presentation in a thunder of applause, and the audience gave him a standing ovation. The next speaker was an elderly, white-haired man, bowed and worn by long years of patient labor as a missionary. I, too, would like to recite the 23rd Psalm, he said. Then, with his face turned upward a little and closing his eyes, he began. When he was through, there was not a sound. No applause. And not a dry eye in the room. Afterward, a man said to the great actor, "I don't understand. You both said the same thing. Your presentation was perfect in every way. Yet, when he spoke in his halting, imperfect manner, people were moved too deeply for words. What made the difference?" "The answer is simple," replied the actor. "I know the 23rd Psalm. I know it well, but he knows the shepherd. Many of us say we know the shepherd, but too few act like it. So-called Christians who say we will do nothing but pray, let God do everything, are failing God, faith, and duty. Our faith and works must match His will. As Beaumont said, faith and work are like light and heat of a candle. They cannot be separated. Those who say it's all ordained, then why fight it? Remind me of the Presbyterian preacher back in the pioneer days who was asked by a parishioner, if you believe things are foreordained and predestined, and you believe that when your time has come, it's come, and there is nothing you can do about it, why do you carry a gun with you when you go to church? Well, he said, it's like this. I carry a gun because I might meet an Indian whose time has come. An old Negro minister said, status quo is just Latin for the mess we is in. The Bible says it came to pass. It didn't say it came to stay. Whether it stays depends on us. No society and no city is better than the individuals in it. No nation can advance except as the individuals who comprise it improve. The human race, to which many politicians belong, has made no measurable improvement morally and intellectually in all human history, and it won't until Christianity prevails. The 64-ruble question is, what's the answer? It's in 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and then turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Remember a fellow a few weeks ago asked A.G. Hansen, "Honey, don't you know that every nation that's been on the kind of toboggan we are on has never straightened it out until it hit itself out until it hit bottom? Why are you beating your brains out?" He said, "Because it's unthinkable not to." No matter how difficult the task or how long the odds, let us never quit trying. Like the fellow on the golf tee who said to his companion, "I've got to do well here." That's my mother-in-law on the clubhouse porch. And his friend said, "Don't be silly. It's 250 yards. You'll never hit her from here." Let's not waste our time in this business yakking with people who are hopeless. When you set out to convert somebody to our cause, the first thing to ask him is, and I heard Evan Garrett say this at this meeting 3 or 4 years ago, "Do you believe in God?" And if he says no, don't waste your time. You've got a lot better prospects. You might as well be trying to persuade NASA to buy bonds for Israel. Many of our most powerful enemies, like Walter Reuther, don't believe in God, and it's possible God doesn't believe in him. This speech, like most speeches, has been like the horn of a male calf, a point here, a point there, and a lot of bull in between. I would like to close by telling you about a friend named Paul, who received a new automobile from his brother as a pre-Christmas present. On Christmas Eve, when Paul came out of his office, a little street urchin was walking around his big new car, admiring it. "Is this your car, mister?" Paul nodded. "My brother gave it to me for Christmas." And the boy looked astonished. "You mean your brother gave it to you and it didn't cost you nothing?" "Gosh, I wish," and he hesitated. Paul knew what he was going to wish. He was going to wish he had a brother like that. What the little boy said jarred him to his heels. "I wish," he said, "I could be a brother like that." Paul looked at him in astonishment, then impulsively asked, "Would you like to ride in my car?" The little boy said, "Yes, sir, I'd love that." After a short ride, the boy turned with his eyes aglow and asked, "Mister, would you mind riding by my house?" Again, Paul knew what he wanted. He wanted to show his family and friends he could ride home in a big new car, but he was wrong again. "Will you stop right where those steps are?" He ran up the steps, and a little while Paul heard him coming back, but he wasn't coming very fast. He was carrying his little polio crippled brother. He sat him down on the front step and sort of nudged up against him, pointed to the car, said, "There she is, buddy, just like I told you upstairs. His brother gave it to him for Christmas, and it didn't cost him nothing. Someday I'm going to give you one just like it. Then you can see for yourself all the pretty things I've been telling you about in the Christmas windows." Paul got out and lifted the little cripple into the front seat, and the shiny-eyed older brother got in beside him, and they began a memorable holiday ride. That Christmas Eve, Paul learned what Jesus really meant when he said, "It is more blessed to give." In traveling around this country, as many of us do, it is a constant blessing, joy, rejuvenation to see the wonderful people who are giving at tremendous sacrifice in many cases. We all know housewives, young housewives with 4 or 5 children who haven't even got a decent set of furniture in a living room, who are giving everything they can give of themselves and substance to try to save our country and the world for God and freedom. And there are many of those people here today. God bless you.